Greetings, everyone. Let me say a very pleasant good evening to you, and let me welcome you again to another Bible study under the auspices of the Temple Hall New Testament Church of God. We want to extend apologies for even last week. We had some technical difficulties that were beyond our control, but thanks be to God. We are here this week to look into the sacred scriptures. We want to turn our attention to Genesis chapter 14. And in this particular chapter, there are two main situations that are coming out. I firstly want to say that we are not going to be in any way focusing on the Battle of Abraham. That Battle of Abraham, of course, has to do with the 5 kings that literally did their raiding. In the ancient world, you're going to find that individuals would actually raid particular tribes depending on their military strength. They would raid weaker tribes and really sack and loot them and take what they had. And so it was not strange that Amraphel and all of these other kings, all 5 of them, would have really done such a thing in terms of war with Sodom and Gomorrah and the kings of the plain, right? So by virtue of that, I don't want to spend any time on that because that is not really the strong part of the text. It is a pretext to what is coming. Secondly, with regards to that, a lot of people are a little fascinated that you would have an army of kings who could defeat nations. Yet Abraham, with trained men out of his household, would have actually been able to defeat them. But nonetheless, it is very much possible in the sense that Abraham would not only have had these servants, they would have been trained warriors based on the situation of the time. These men who would have comprised the household of Abraham, who would have been 300 and odd, would have been trained men who were able to bear arms, somewhat of a militia. If you look even now in places like Iraq, especially in Afghanistan, you're going to find that there are still tribes and networks and militias that operate independently of central government. And it's very much a norm for them, even though democracy and all of these other Western ideas, I wouldn't say Western ideas wholesale, but all of these political ideas and ideologies have become commonplace. But it is still quite normal to find the Haqqani network. That is one of those groups in Iraq that wields political power but operates somewhat independently from the government, right? So by virtue of that, there was really nothing to ponder too hard about with regards to the idea of this band of tribesmen belonging to Abraham's household, really defeating the kings with the help of the slime pits of the area and really bringing back the loot. Let me just share too, that in the ancient world, soldiers were not paid. And so when they went on raids, their salaries would have been the loot that they would have recovered from whosoever they actually went to defeat. So you have to bear all these in mind. Why? Because it sets the context for what is about to take place. And so I want to share with you that the main focus for this week and possibly next week will be the idea of the 2 kings. Because aside from the fact that Abraham would defeat the invading kings, there was also a situation where 2 kings engaged Abraham. And in their engaging of Abraham, it kind of opens the door to something that is of an eternal value. And I think it's very important. It's one that is misunderstood, if I must say. It is misunderstood, and sometimes it gets a little bounced around. but we're going to look at it as best as we can. And so permit me to share my screen with you. And we're going to be looking this evening at the whole story of Melchizedek. I want to share that it's not Melchizedek, it is Melchizedek. That is the idea of the name. It's the pronunciation rather of the name, Melchizedek. Because in this particular chapter, chapter 14, Abraham for the first time meets with the king Melchizedek. And a lot of people are fascinated by Melchizedek. They are fascinated by the fact that Jesus Christ is a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So what we're going to do is that we're going to delve into that this evening, because that is the pivotal, the anchoring portion of chapter 14. And you will see as we go along. So permit me, everyone, to look at Melchizedek, king and priest. All right? Now let me read from verse 17 to 20 of chapter 4 of the Gospel of Genesis. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thine hands. And he, Abraham, gave Melchizedek tithes of all. All right? Now, the text as read provides the background for a number of purposes and principles that are going to come out. One, the text kind of shows the moral character of this man, Melchizedek. Yes? Secondly, it demonstrates his greatness as a king, as a priest, and of course, to establish an order of priesthood other than that of Aaron. Let me pause here just for a moment to let you know, first of all, that you keep this in mind, that this is prior to the giving of the Decalogue. It is before the giving of the law. It is before the writing of the 613 principles that govern the lives of the Israelites, all right? So I want you to bear that in mind, and you will see just how important that is, just how pivotal it is to understanding exactly what God is doing. So I want us to look at the two kings that would have engaged Abraham and the two offers that they would have presented to Abraham. Now, there are two characters, and they are the king of Sodom and the king of Salem. Let me put that out there. These two kings approached Abraham after his victory over the 5 kings of the Orient. Both of these kings were actually rulers. Both of them were literally men of import within their own spheres of political and other influence. And both of them, having seen the bravery of Abraham and what he had done in actually rescuing his nephew, in actually defeating the kings that defeated them, and establishing that there is might within his household. Both of them came and engaged him and made offers to him. All right? Now, just to let you know that the king of Sodom, if you look early on up in the text, his name is Berah. And so the king of Sodom, he came to Abraham after Abraham had defeated the kings that had plundered his country. All right? I want you to watch this. And when he came to some extent to offer Abraham particular things. So according to what we see, and I may stretch the understanding here a little bit, is that he offered Abraham all the goods, everything that they had recovered from the battle with the kings of the Orient. All right? In other words, as I said when we started, that soldiers were not salarized. And so when the armies would do their plunder and win the victory, rather, they would take the plunder and they would divide it among themselves. And that is their salary, that's their pay, right? So what is happening here is that he's offering Abraham all the recovered goods that the 5 kings would have taken. But something happened that Abraham would not receive a reward from the king of Sodom, right? No, the name king of Sodom, or the name Birah, as I shared with you, that's his name, literally carries the idea of in evil. So it could be that he lived in evil, he dwelt in evil, or the fact is that God had called out Abraham out of a particular lifestyle from a particular set of people, and people like Birah, king of Sodom, was still living in the evil that God has called Abraham out of. So the idea here is that Birah, as he makes the offer to Abraham, yes, he's literally doing it out of obligation, probably even to some extent out of awe at what had happened. But when you look at what is actually said, Abraham declared that the king of Sodom must never boast that he has made Abraham rich. The idea is Abraham already had a lot of stuff. He was already rich. Are you getting where I'm going to? When you look at the fact that Abraham and Lot had so much that they could not dwell together in the same place, you're going to recognize that Abraham was already wealthy. How was Abraham, or how did he acquire the wealth? You find that even when he went down into Egypt, and we looked at that a couple of weeks ago, that God allowed the king of Egypt to deal well with him, to provide for him, even though Abraham had tricked him by calling Sarah his wife, his sister, sorry. But the understanding that we must receive here is the fact that when Abraham is proposed, or is given the proposal by the king of Sodom, Abraham knows that in short order, wherever he is, the king of Sodom will make the boast that Abraham is this great and this rich because I allowed him to take what came from Sodom. So in essence, what Abraham is I don't want to use the term running from, but what he's avoiding is that he's avoiding the king of Sodom taking the glory for what the God of heaven would have given unto him. And so you find that, he would not receive anything from this man, but he would receive a reward from the King of Kings, the Lord and creator of the heaven and the earth, the possessor of heaven and earth. There's a lesson in this, everybody. There is a lesson in this. And the lesson is that, irrespective of what may come our way in life, compromise is never an option. Compromise is never an option. Many of us find ourselves in need of this world's goods. And it takes a kind of toll on the mind, whether you are Christian or otherwise. The human element of who we are tends to consider deeply when there are needs and they cannot be met. And the temptation is always there. Probably the king of Sodom will not come to you. But sometimes there is a temptation for all that dwell in evil. And let me tell you what I mean. One of the things that I recognize, and I listen to a particular radio station in the morning. And for the last couple of mornings, I've been hearing that the lotto jackpot, somebody has become a millionaire because they have won $59 million. And any of us, all of us could do well with $59 million. When you look at gas prices nowadays, it went up by another $4.50. So you find that our gas prices go up by $4.50 each time and come down by 25 cents, And so you find that sometimes when you are pressed, along with these gas prices, you have all the other attendant bills. Water rate has gone up by 11%. Yes, the electricity based on the fuel has gone up. Many of us are also seeing the spike in food prices. And for those who, may not know, there are things that may be in short supply, so we have to ensure that when they're in short supply, we get them and store them up that we can have for when there is none at all. That being said, many of us, if not all, could do well with the offer of the king of Sodom. But to accept the Sodomites' offer would be tantamount not only to compromise, but treason to the Almighty God. And so, brothers and sisters, it is important that while we see, to some extent, the opportunities that life gives to us, we have to ensure that whatever opportunity it is, when we do embrace it, the devil does not get the glory. Amen. And so, brothers and sisters, the Bible tells us that Abraham says, the king of Sodom will not stand over me, to declare to his friends and all those who dwell in evil that I have made Abraham rich. The idea is Abraham is already a man of substance, and he knows that God is going to bless him more abundantly. So he will not allow the king of Sodom to take the glory of the Almighty God for himself. All right? So we find that Abraham, therefore, is embraced, or what I should say, approached by another king. And this one is not Berah from Sodom, but he is Melchizedek, right? And he's from Salem. Now, when you look at the difference between these two kings, the first king does not carry anything to offer to Abraham. No, sirree. But he offers to Abraham that which God had already allowed Abraham to win back in his behalf, right? But in this case, the king of Salem brought with him bread and he brought with him wine. And it is very important. It's very important because that is a priestly act. And as we go further, you're going to see how it pans out, probably not just in the bread and the wine, but in the way he engages Abraham. Because when he comes, he does not say to Abraham, take the loot, or I just brought something for you just to whatever. He acknowledges that it was the Lord, the creator of heaven and earth, that delivered the victory to Abraham. Unlike the king of Sodom, who is just a political guy, you find that this king acknowledges God. And that which he brings to Abraham is an acknowledgement of that which is priestly and that which God has done, rather. And it's a priestly act as he does it. Yes? Now, when you look at Abraham, as he looks at these two offers, you have to now ask yourself the question, why is it that Abraham will actually engage one king? And to some extent, he would in a nice way rebuff the other, right? But what you must acknowledge here or see in the text is that the validity of Melchizedek's offer is connected to the God to whom Abraham is connected. You have to get that. The validity of Melchizedek's offer to him bringing bread and wine, and you're going to see going further, is actually something that is acknowledged, that is received, that is actually embraced, because the act of Melchizedek is connected to the God to whom Abraham is connected. So Abraham, he looks at Melchizedek's offer. He recognized the priesthood of Melchizedek. And out of this now, he paid a tithe. Now I'm going to pause here a little bit. He paid a tithe. Now listen, everybody. We have a particular thought that goes now, and that is common. You know, to some extent, it is not only common, but practiced by some churches. And I have heard men of God really disparaging some of our fellow yoke bearers. I've heard some individuals saying that the pastor must go look work because he's robbing the people. And others are saying that tithe is from the law. And others are saying that when tithe is taken, it is a tax on the people. Now listen to me very carefully, right? One of the things that you're going to find is that the idea of a priest, and we're going to go into that shortly, is that he should have no other vocation. Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treads the corn. What the Lord did was that the Lord said to 11 tribes of Israel, I am going to bless you. And when I bless you, you are going to bless the tribe of Levi, because I have selected that tribe to be priests before me forever. And because they are priests before me forever, they should not have another 9 to 5, but they shall be in the temple every day, because I have selected them for this particular thing. So those who tell the pastor to get a job, very unbiblical, whether you want to look at it. And we do recognize that Paul was a tent maker. That's the argument that people tend to speak about. But Moses was a shepherd. Yes? Excuse me, Moses was a shepherd. Jesus was a carpenter. But yet these men were what? Full time in their service to the Lord. And when Paul in the book of Corinthians, if I'm not mistaken, says that he labored with his hands, or Corinthians or Ephesians, I'll soon tell you what it was, that he labored with his hands and he didn't rely on them for necessities. It was not to say that he did not receive gifts from them. He was literally highlighting that this particular gift must not be used against him. So he didn't receive a gift at the hand of this church because it may be used against him, as they sought to attack him, as a lot of individuals normally did as he went on his missionary journeys. If you look at some of the other writings of Paul, you will see him sending thanks for the gifts that had come. You understand that people what? Took care of his necessities. So the idea of tithing does not have to do with a pastor who is lazy and a pastor who is trying to rob the people. Secondly, the tithing has nothing to do with the law, because the law has not yet been developed. That's in the book of Exodus. And when you check on it, you're going to recognize that this does not apply so much so to law. This is a spiritual act. Yes? And what you must recognize is that it was in existence. It was in existence probably prior to the time of Abraham. Because Abraham paying a tithe, it's not that he started a new movement. It would appear that in recognizing the priestly function of Melchizedek, he felt his duty was, his response was, the best way to respond to what Melchizedek was doing was to acknowledge him as priest, and in so acknowledging him, he paid a tithe. Why and how can we deduce that? One, because Melchizedek is a king. He doesn't need anything from Abraham. He's a king. He's the king of Salem. But as a priest, The tithe must be received into the storehouse, right? Why? Melchizedek could not refuse the tithe because the tithe is paid in honor to God and not to him. Oh, yeah. I want you to get where I'm going. The idea is that this is the worshiper's act of worship. He cannot turn it away because he's the priest of God, not the God. If you understand where I'm going, he's not God. So as a king, Melchizedek would not take anything from Abraham. He doesn't need it, right? But when you look at Abraham paying tithes to him, Abraham is not doing a political or a social activity. He's doing a spiritual activity. He is acknowledging the priest of the Most High God. There are some people who say that you're taxing the people. Years ago, one of the great ministers of the church said to me, he said, you know, son, don't sorry the people out of the blessing. Teach them to give. And even when they don't have much, tell them to give. Because it is in that principle that God will give to them, that they can continue giving. And so the idea is that the individual, as they come to the Lord, must come with a particular kind of mindset that is not hamstrung by what society thinks. It's not hamstrung by the mindset of envious people, but it is in honor to God. Just today, I had a discussion with a wonderful woman of God. I mean, she is a servant of the Most High. And as we spoke, you know, she touched on many different topics. But one thing she said that was the entire discussion for me. She said, in spite of all that is happening around us, in spite of the fact that, you know, our priesthood, let me use that term, is less than perfect, whatever we do is all for the honor of the Almighty God. What people are looking for, or what God is looking for, sorry, are people who are not seeking a reason as to why they should tithe or not tithe, but people who are saying, I want to honor God, you know? And so, brothers and sisters, it's not one of the subjects and topics that I tend to be on too much, and the people at Temple Hall will tell those who are from overseas. It's not something that I really, you know? But I think that it is worth not only mentioning, but teaching the people as to why it is important. And I can share with you that everything that the church needs in order to go forward is in the church. Every need the church has, all the resources are in the church that we can actually do it. I'll say this to you, that in the churches, and when I say that, I don't mean denominationally, you're going to find that in churches worldwide, sometimes it's just between 20 and 40% of the church are the members actually support the church financially. They are giving unto the Lord. And by virtue of that, you find that sometimes the church does not really struggle. In my mind, it doesn't struggle. But I think we could do more if the people of God were obedient to the fact that we are bringing something to the Lord. So we recognize that Abraham acknowledges priesthood by what? Paying tithe to him. He showed respect to the office of the priest. No, Melchizedek is king of Salem, right? And Melchizedek is composed of two words, all right? Now, the first one I can tell you is Malak or Malek. That means king, right? And the second one is Sidek, from which we get the word righteousness. He is Jehovah Sid Kenu, from Sidek, the Lord my righteousness. So Melech means king. Melech, Malak, whichever one you want to use, means king. Sidek actually speaks of righteousness. So those two words coming together literally highlights his name, King of Righteousness. Yes, the name of his city was Peace, because the name is Salem. And we know that Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, as we call it, is actually called the city of peace. Yes? So two things are evident here, just from the name Melchizedek. One is that he was a king that was characterized by righteousness. I was coming up the road today. I went to the funeral service of a very good friend and brother, from the Mountain View Church. And as I was coming up, my son and I were in the car, and I think there was a BMW that came out, and the fellow in the BMW, of course, was on his phone and just doing the thing and not even paying attention to the road properly. And in my mind, I remembered something that one of the Jamaican educators, Professor Rex Nettleford, said many years ago. He said a butu in a Benz is still a butu, and I don't say that to be disparaging. It is just that a position that someone holds, a piece of property that someone possesses, a car that someone drives, says nothing about the internal character of that individual. I say that to say this: Melchizedek, by name, by nature, by position, was seen as a king who had a character of righteousness. He was not like Berah in evil. Because remember, that's what Berah means, the king of Sodom. His name is Berah, meaning in evil. But the writer was careful to allow us to know that this particular king, Melchizedek, was a king of righteousness. And secondly, his rule was not one like in Sodom and Gomorrah, wherein the inordinate affection of human lust and desire gone rampant was the king and ruler of everyone who was there. The rule of Melchizedek in Salem was one of peace. It was one of peace. And so we see the difference between the two kings. We see the difference between the two offers. We see the difference between the two approaches. Because at the ending of the day, Abraham had to discern what was of God and what was of the enemy. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, people are so desperate. As the thing comes, man, we just believe it is from God without discerning sometimes where it is coming from. And so from there, we forget everything about the king of Sodom. We do not spend any more time on him, so to speak. Even as you go further, to the issue that takes place with Lot, when the angels destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, they do not highlight the king anymore. Why? Because he's no longer of any great import to the discussion. Because from this portion on, all the attention is now placed upon Melchizedek. Melchizedek was great. He's a king of righteousness, and he rules in peace. Why? Because he worshipped the God Most High, El Elyon. Yes? He worshipped the Most High God. The Most High God was the same God that called Abraham. So in other words, you can find that the connection between them, again, comes through the idea that the Most High God is worshipped by both of them. Yes? So look at it. El was worshipped by the Canaanites. Yes? They saw him as creator. They saw him as father. One of the things that is important too is that they would have been aware of terms like the Most High. However, I think what is coming out of this text is that while the Canaanites may have known about God, right? Just as the rest of the ancient world had their conception of who this great God was, they would have known about God. But Abraham and Melchizedek would have known God. Not just known about him, but they would have known him. Abraham had a personal connection. We see that he was called by God personally. So we know the connection is there. Melchizedek worshipped the same Most High God and was a priest. Not only was he an adherent like Abraham, he was literally a forerunner, a leader when it comes on to worshiping the God of creation. By this time, everybody, because remember, mankind started with a perfect knowledge of God. By this particular juncture, coming through Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, the flood, Noah, and all of that, the concept of God would have been utterly corrupted through the evil of humanity, right? So you have to bear that in mind. So people would take God and make him what they want him to be. In the very same way that you see it happening now, where in some ideological circles in the States, especially the States, there are a number of people who want to tell Christians who God is. They say Jesus is love. So he's always talking about love. They never mention that he speaks about judgment and sin. They say that he wants everybody to be who they are. And they never see that he spoke about repentance, changing. So the idea is when a man or a woman wants to live their own lifestyle and they want to allow individuals, or they do not want the conscience or the idea that they are responsible and accountable to the Most High God, they tend to rationalize and make God what they want, so to speak. But Abraham here knew God to the extent that God called him his friend. God called him his friend. Melchizedek was a priest of this Most High God. Melchizedek also had dual offices, all right? And these two offices were actually that of king and of priest. As priest, he blessed Abraham. And again, it's a priestly function. The same way that he carried bread and wine, this also was a priestly function. And because of the fact that Abraham would have received the blessing, and again, I want you to look at it, that Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek, and Melchizedek blessed him. The blessing is not a kingly function. The blessing is a priestly function. If Abraham had received from the king of Sodom, he would have been richer, but he would not have been spiritually blessed. Why? Because the king of Sodom is far from being a priest. But in essence, here is Melchizedek, who occupied the two offices, who brought the bread and the wine, literally now goes into the office of priest as he engages. The king of Sodom approached Abraham as king. Melchizedek approaches him as priest. So Abraham gives Melchizedek again a tenth of the spoil. Why? Because it is how you engage the priest, right? But all of this is established that individuals would know that there was an order that preceded the priesthood of Aaron, or the Aaronic priesthood. What do I mean? By the time we get around to Numbers, and I'm going to take you into the priesthood this evening, and depending on the time, my time to complete the priesthood, right? We're about 20 minutes. And so you find that there was another order before the of Aaron, right? So it is to establish that God has what? An order. He never began the order with Aaron. The order was in place. And I'm stretching the text, so please do not quote me on this. But the order had always been in place. When you look at the relation or relationship between God and Adam, you find that there was a particular face-to-face engagement. When Adam and Eve sinned, all of a sudden, God was hidden from their faces. So when their sons would come before God as their own priests, because if they're coming before God, offering their own sacrifices, and we don't look this deeply into what Cain and Abel were doing, they were being their own priests before God. Yes? And we know the story, the priesthood of these two young men, of course, had issues. And the order was always there. That's what I'm trying to establish. When Noah would have come out of the ark, Noah served a priestly function to some extent, in the sense that he offered up something to the Almighty God. Yes? And as you go further into the text, you are going to see the priestly role as things evolve of the father of the household, as he tends to bless his offspring and bless his household, right? So the point is that there's always been an order. There's always been an order. Now, this that we're seeing here appears to be a more, or we can put it, well-organized kind of a thing, in the sense that this king of Salem, Melchizedek, is an established priest. So it's not just an individual, mediating to God through sacrifice and what have you. But this particular priest is a part of a particular establishment that can, to some extent, be seen as an order that is of a particular standard. It is established, it is professional, it is set, kind of a thing, right? So Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. Now, it's important that we kind of understand the idea of the priesthood, because the priesthood is becoming the central issue. And you're going to see that as we go on. And so I thought that it was important that I kind of give you a little thing on the priesthood. And we may stop here tonight, not certain, but let's see how far we can get, all right? So thus far, Abraham has been approached by 2 kings and offers made. Abraham turned down the king of Sodom, but Abraham embraced and acknowledged Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, the one who reigns over the city of peace, the one to whom tithe was given as a priest, and the one who blessed Abraham. So let us look now at the origins, and this is in no way a comprehensive engagement of the origins of the priesthood, just to kind of give you a broad understanding, all right? Now, when you look at the idea of priesthood, the New Testament word that is used for priest is related to a word for holy. And I have taken pains on this Bible study to share with the people of God that the opposite of holiness is not sin. I have taken pains to do it. The opposite of holiness is actually commonality and commonness. Why? Because the word holy means to be separated from that which is common. Yes? When Peter says, Lord, I have not eaten anything unclean, he's saying by Jewish standard, being the separated people. Yes? That, I am a part. Remember, it was Peter who declared that we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, because he's quoting from the book of Deuteronomy or Exodus 19. He's quoting from the book of the Old Testament. But what you're going to find here is that the Lord was sharing with Peter in the book of Acts that all those who now believe on the Lord, both Jews and Gentiles, have become holy. The Lord says to him, what I have sanctified, do not call unclean. Do not call it common. Means that the Gentiles are now holy, just as the Jews were holy and are holy. All right? So the idea here is that the New Testament word used for priest is related to the idea of holiness, being separated, being set apart for a particular use. In most instances, for holy usage. It also indicates an individual who is consecrated to and is engaged in holy matters. So the word relates to that which is holy, but it can be used to identify an individual who works with things that are holy and himself is holy. All right? When we look at the Old Testament Hebrew, The word is close to seer. Now, the word seer used in the Old Testament denotes a prophet. Yes, but to some extent, here it is a little nuanced. It leans to a certain way, and that is that it speaks of one who is engaged with divine things. All right, one who is engaged with divine things. Now, I want to share with you from the book of Numbers the stipulations of what it took to be a priest. Remember, let me just reverse the slide. Remember that the idea of the priest comes from the idea of holiness, one who is involved in the divine things, one who is involved in engaging God. So let's look at the requirements for a priest as written in the book of Numbers chapter 21, verse 16 to 20. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, for the generations to come, none of your descendants who has a defect may come near to offer food, the food of his God. No man who has any defect may come near. No man who is blind or lame, disfigured or deformed, no man with a crippled foot or hand, or who is hunchback, or a dwarf, or who has an eye defect, or who has festering or running sores or damaged testicles. My goodness. Let me move on. No descendant of Aaron the priest who has any defect is to come near to present the food offering of the Lord. He has a defect. He must not come near to offer the food of his God. He may eat the most holy food of his God as well as the holy food. Yet because of his defect, he must not go near the curtain or approach the altar and so desecrate my sanctuary. I am the Lord who makes them holy. So Moses told this to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelites. Now that is the requirements. Because God has the entire tribe of Levi as his priests, they can still eat the food of the temple, but they cannot come near in any way, come near to his altar or to the curtain that separates the holy place. You get where I'm going? So you have to bear in mind how stringent the situation or the stipulations rather were for those who would be priests, right? So if you look at this text, many of us who are priests today and preachers and evangelists and whatever we want to call them, we would not be accepted. We would not be accepted, because apparently the priest had to be selected, hand-selected and hand-picked, perfect and handsome and tall and can't have any hunchback and can't be a dwarf and you couldn't even have a sore. So the idea is that the priesthood was one that was literally hand-selected and separated unto God for a particular use. Now, you may ask, who are the priests? There are 12 tribes of Israel. And the tribe of Levi was singled out. This is the tribe from which Aaron literally came. Aaron is the brother of Moses, Miriam the sister. So you find that this tribe was selected. According to the law, this tribe will rarely not have lot or inheritance in Israel. The Lord is their inheritance. In other words, in the way that the land was cut up by Joshua and given to the other Israelites, Levi was left out of that, or should be left out of that, because Levi are the priests. They are before the Lord. Now watch this. The idea is that each tribe would receive land upon which they would cultivate their crops. Remember, Israel was an agrarian society, so they depended upon the former rains and the latter rains. They depended upon the produce of the ground. They depended upon that which came from farming. And Levi was not supposed to join the farmers in their farming. But God would bless the 11 tribes, and they would in turn take a tenth of the blessing and offering it to the Lord. And Levi, being the priests and being the ones who their inheritance is God, would then receive from the tithe that was brought into the storehouse. And you know, Church of God, I can share with you that in many churches, and I have to always say that I thank God for the churches I have pastored, wonderful people of God. But in many churches, a number of ministers suffer great indignities. Yes, because of immature individuals who have no understanding of spiritual things. And so when persons are displeased with their ministers, they stop the spiritual thing. They stop tithing. And what that does is that it betrays to a greater extent the idea that individuals do not understand what it is about. The tithe is not to the minister, it is to God. That is what it is about. The minister, the priest must eat from the tithe. Because when you go and you do the work of the great men and women of Jamaican society, the Matalons and those who are of high society, after you have worked there, you expect to actually what? Eat from what you do. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, I tend to break down, you know, in terms of what ministers do. Many ministers suffer burnout because they have so many things and so many people that pull at their attention. And there are many individuals who have really been truly unkind to the work of the ministers. The same ministers that must pray for everybody. The same minister that if the entire church visits the sick in hospital and the minister does not come, or at the very least give a call, nobody from church no come, and the pastor is the worst man or the worst woman in the world. The very same minister who must pray for their sick, bury their dead, baptize their unsaved spouses and children. Same minister who must dedicate their newborns to the Lord, marry their children. Do I need to go further? Oftentimes, these same ministers suffer great indignity because of the kind of mindset that individuals have. But the priesthood is God's inheritance. And Levi, their inheritance is God. And so by virtue of that, the Lord put something in place to take care of his priests. Priests and pastors, many are bivocational. Others are thinking that we must go bivocational because we will not survive. But if the people of God are fully faithful, I can share with you that bread will be in the house of the Lord. And of course, there'll be meal in the house of the Lord. And that's why God had to rebuke those who actually in the days of Malachi were building up their own homes and forgetting the house of God. So he says, if you will bring in the tithe, then what you will do is that meat will be in my house. And if meat is in my house, then I'll open the windows of heaven. Some of you will remember when we looked at Near Eastern cosmology, yes, as to how the idea of the windows of heaven, they believe that there were windows cut in the canopy of heaven. So they're using the same language. God said, I'll open the windows of heaven and I'll give you the water, and the water will come in such a way that your land will bring forth, that you have to tear down your barns because your barns won't be able to manage the harvest that I give unto you. Oh, that we will produce and present before God as righteous Abel and not as envious Cain. And that being the case, we receive a harvest from the hand of the Lord. So the tribe of Levi, the entire tribe, was seen as the people or the possession of God. And they were to be priests and high priests before the Lord all the days of their lives. Of course, they were arranged in 24 courses, and each had to serve a week, so to speak. But I won't go too deep into that. We will look at that another time when we're looking more deeply into the priesthood. The high priests, all of them came out of Aaron's family. So all the priests are from the tribe of Levi, right? Aaron is from the tribe of Levi, but all the high priests came from his family. They were to be his descendants all the way through. One of the things that is also highlighted is that all the firstborn males belong to the Lord, right? So the firstborn males, in particular in Levi, belong to God. God had special claim on all the males of Israel, and he chose the entire tribe of Levi for full service to him as substitute. What does that mean? It means that because every male that is born in all 12 tribes belong to God, he selected Levi as the proverbial, note my terminology, the proverbial male that opened the matrix. And Levi would stand as a symbol and a substitute for all the firstborn males throughout all of Israel. And they would serve him. So instead of God going and picking every firstborn male out of taking the firstborn from Reuben and from, he said Levi will stand as a substitute for every firstborn male in Israel. All right. No, the Levites became priests of Israel, and they devoted their lives, their entire lives, to maintaining and enforcing the worship of God. This started in their wilderness wanderings in the tabernacle and later in the temple. All right. So when they, under Moses, when they traveled in the ancient Near East and the wilderness of Sin, the wilderness of Kadesh Barnea, in these areas when they would pitch the tent and they would do their worship, the tribes of Levi, or the tribe of Levi, served as priests, and Aaron was high priest. Yes, his sons and descendants would later take it on when Solomon would have built the temple. All right. So within the tribe of Levi, Aaron and his sons were given special status as the high priest. So therefore, their high priestly family had the highest responsibility in Israel, spiritually speaking. But they also had privileges, right? And the privilege they had was to what? Serve in the holy place, right? And also to serve in the most holy place. Here's the difference. They serve in the holy place daily, which is the holy place, and they served in the Holy of Holies once per year. So I want you to get that understanding. They served as intermediaries between the worshiper and God. In other words, the Levites, or the priests, let's use that term, represented God to man and represented man to God. That was the role of the priest, the intermediary of the Aaronic priesthood, to stand as the medium, or the medium, I should say, between God and man. Yes? So looking at that, we recognize that the priesthood is pivotal to the worship of God. Yes? If we should just backtrack a little bit, remember that we said that while the Aaronic priesthood, was established and Israel would have understood based on Moses' description of what he did, there was an order before Aaron. That was the order of Melchizedek. In other words, Melchizedek was a priest long before Aaron was even a thought in his family or his mother's mind, before she was born and probably her mother was born. there was already an established priesthood. And that was the priesthood that was emphasized by the presence of Melchizedek. Yes? So based on the description, a lot of people tend to, let me use the right term here, romanticize the section of Melchizedek that says he was without father or without mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of days. There's a lot of romanticizing of it. But the main thing the author is getting at is the solitary nature of Melchizedek. In other words, in the Aaronic priesthood, the priesthood is passed down. You get it? But with Melchizedek, you find that there was no one who passed on the priesthood to him. He was established a priest. So the context here is more saying that whatever Melchizedek is doing, he's established by God. He did not receive a priesthood from mother or father, from a lineage, yes? But the idea is that he represents a priesthood that comes from God. In other words, what he was and where he is was not as a result of his descent. It's not as a result of which family he belonged to. He never assumed office at the death of anyone, and he never demitted office, getting old or passing the baton. Hence, his priesthood abides forever. Melchizedek was the image, the facsimile of what the priesthood was really to be. And Christ is the reality. In other words, Melchizedek was the shadow of the perfect priesthood, right? Never assumed office, never demitted office, never received it as a result of his descent. But what? He stood as a symbol of the perfect priesthood of which Christ would come and show the reality of that priesthood. In other words, Paul puts it this way: there is no other name given under heaven whereby men shall be saved, but at the name of Jesus Christ. He is our Melchizedek. He is our priest. What makes Christ so, let me use the right term, unique, is the fact that he is the priest, but he's also the sacrifice. My goodness. He is the priest, but he's also the sacrifice, right? When you look at Christ, he is called the Son of God. And I've explained to the people that son here does not speak of offspring. When he is referred to as the Son of God, he is not referred to as the offspring or the child that comes forth from God. No. The term son here is positional in its application. The son, and in the ancient culture, ancient Near Eastern culture, let me be more specific, and in particular referencing the firstborn son, normally sits at the right hand of his father, and it symbolizes that he has the power of his father. So the idea is that as son, Jesus is being established here not as an offspring, but as the power of God seated on his right hand. That's the idea. So Melchizedek, before the law, before the temple, before all of this, comes as an example, a shadow, a facsimile of what the perfect priesthood is. The Aaronic priesthood is a priesthood of men, but Christ is the reality of the priesthood. So therefore, when we look at Jesus Christ, in light of the priesthood of Melchizedek, we recognize that Christ is therefore the King of righteousness and peace in the fullest sense of the word, our term, right? He is a priest like or in the order of Melchizedek. He is a priest forever. Giving tithe and receiving the blessing literally speaks of the priest. That's what Melchizedek did. He gave things their blessing and received tithes. Abraham doubly symbolized his inferiority to Melchizedek. So Abraham gave tithe to Melchizedek. Abraham received a blessing. In giving the tithe, Abraham is saying, you are a priest of the Most High God, I am inferior to you. In receiving a blessing, the term here carries the idea of the superior bestowing a blessing on the inferior, right? The word barak and even the ashar, both of those words, those are Hebrew words, carries the idea of the inferior receiving. So by the fact that Abraham gave tithe to acknowledge that the priest was higher than he was and received the blessing, doubly symbolizing that Melchizedek was higher than he was. We recognize that the priesthood of Melchizedek is superior to the Aaronic priesthood. And I'm getting the wrap-up signal, so let me just take us through our summary for this particular area. Now, when we look at the Levitical priesthood, right, having come out of making that comparison, let me go back to our summary here. We're in Abraham, it engaged in Melchizedek, highlighted Melchizedek's superiority to him as Abraham. You look and you recognize that the Levitical priests are superior to all other Israelites. Why? Because like Melchizedek, they serve as priests of God. Yes? And in the same way that Abraham would recognize Melchizedek, so the rest of the Israelites would recognize the Levites because they were the portion of God. You know, God is their portion, right? They have a law instructing them to collect a tenth from the people in the same way that Abraham paid a tenth to Melchizedek. But even Levi, who collected a tenth, paid a tenth to Melchizedek through Abraham. What do I mean? That even though the Levites are seen as superior to all other Israelites because they are the priests, yes, they have laws that give them the right to collect a tenth from the people. But Levi, as much as they are seen as being above the people of Israel, was in the loins of Abraham. Yes, they were in his loins. And while they were still in Abraham's loins, as Abraham paid a tithe to Melchizedek, they were in his loins representing the same. So the idea is that they themselves too, as great as they were to the other Israelites, were inferior to Melchizedek because they were in Abraham's loins as Abraham paid tithe to Melchizedek, right? The Levitical priests, though superior to the other Israelites, are inferior to the Melchizedek. Therefore, their priesthood is also inferior to his. The Levitical priests are superior to the rest of Israel. Though mortal, they tithe their brethren or receive it. Levi is superior to the priests because he is their progenitor. In other words, Levi himself, right, as the son of Jacob, is superior to all of his descendants, to include Aaron, because he is the head of the tribe. He was the one from whom all of them descended. Abraham is greater than Levi because Levi descended from Abraham. Abraham is the father of them all. And Melchizedek is greater than Abraham because he both tithed. Abraham tithed to him. Yes? And Abraham received that blessing from him, stating his superiority as the priest of the Most High God. So the idea here is that the order of Melchizedek is a superior order to the order of Aaron. In Christ, the Aaronic priesthood was abolished. There is established the priesthood of all believers. So all believers now share in Christ's priestly activities. That is, bringing Christ to men and bringing men to Christ. I want to probably stop there this evening. My time has come to an end. And so we're going to be looking at, we looked at the whole thing of the priesthood. We're going to be looking at, God's willing, next week, the order of Melchizedek, how that relates to the priesthood of Christ, because the priesthood of Aaron is inferior. But you're going to recognize that the order of Melchizedek Christ's priesthood is compared to the priesthood that is superior. So let us end there for this evening. Let me just thank all those who had joined us on the YouTube platform. It was a pleasure having you. It was our delight to have you share with us as we go through our Bible studies. I want to just ask of you, just to be safe in this time. We hear that COVID is back on the rise, but we continue to pray for each other. And so we ask that you will invite someone to the channel. And please, if you have not yet subscribed, please do. We are still trying to build up our subscriber base, and like and share. God bless you. Thank you so very much for being a part of us tonight. And until we meet again next week, God's willing, take care, walk good.